everyone, and welcome to our discussion on the future of energy. I am Rick Case, and I am the Director of Engineering Services here at JPS, and I'm joined by
Lincoln Small. I'm the Director of System Operations.
And nothing pleases us more than to speak about the future, and particular energy. And it's nice when we have to speak about the future of energy.
Especially right? With some of the future young persons in the room here who will be leading that change.
Exactly. And as futurists, we pride ourselves in looking 20, 30 years into the future and basically creating the sustainable grid that we need to operate at that time. So it gives me great pleasure to be here with Lincoln, a close friend and colleague, and to welcome all our viewers on Facebook, our viewers who are on the MyJPS site, and those of you who are on YouTube. So welcome to everyone. Thank you. So the future of energy, we believe, lies in our imagination. Before we started today, Lincoln, I asked the guys in the room, all of these young, bright people, you know, what did they see as the future of energy, right? And you could see all of the faces lighting up. And one of the things that was common in the thought bubbles over their heads was that there was some imagination component that was linked to it. Okay. Some innovation component that was linked to it, which is kind of undefined. And if you think about it, when you look on where transportation is now, today, can we say that when we were growing up and we used to watch Knight Rider, and you remember Michael Knight?
Yeah.
And he had that car, Kit. And Kit was a car that used to speak to him, right? And he could call Kit. Kit could do all of these things.
I had bought a Kit. I have a Kit at home, actually, that I still sometimes drive when I'm in my little childish moments.
Exactly. But think about how the imagination that created Kit is now part of our reality. So much so that science fiction is really now science fact. True. And we're still in 2020. People are able to summon cars now. Tesla has some of these nice features where you can summon the car and it finds you. You have these autonomous driving cars where you don't need a driver anymore to drive a car. So I'm saying this point because it really is in our imagination. Technology has put energy in such a space where it's almost like whatever you can conceive, you basically can build it and allow it to serve our customers. And when you think about the future of energy, it just doesn't happen by just dreaming only. There are certain guidelines, and some of these are hard guidelines that basically are boundaries that steer the future of energy, right? And these are themes that we find happening. You see them in a lot of conferences, in a lot of articles that are written about what the sustainable grid needs to look like. Okay. You're talking about the effects of climate change and weather phenomena. When we talk about decarbonization and making the planet greener, and you're seeing the advance in technologies that basically is forcing us to operate more efficiently, right? And to basically improve on what we have now. If we are to dive deeper into some of these things and look on it, we remember what Hurricane Dorian did, right, to the people in Bahamas just this summer, where resilience now is a big thing. The whole country was decimated. The entire power grid was decimated. If you're thinking about a future of energy, how can you leave resilience out of it?
And then that's a very good question. As citizens of the Caribbean, right, hurricanes, natural disasters are a reality for us, right? How do we grow, develop our energy sector knowing that one significant event, right, just like that over a 24-hour period can wipe out everything that we have built, right, over the past 10, 20, 30 years. So as we plan together as young engineers, I still consider myself to be very young and youthful, right? You have to put in mind, right, you have to understand your environmental factors. Environmental could be social factors, right? It could be financial challenges, right? The things that you need to steer this future, steer your future, our future, my son's future, towards a system that is reliable, that is affordable, and that is resilient, and it can stand up to any test, any challenge, so that it will keep Jamaica on par with first world countries. Because, come on, we're not going to be left behind. I don't like the concept of third world or developing countries. Jamaica is on the path to achieving greatness. For example, I am one of the directors of system operations, and I can tell you when persons come down from developed countries, right, and they're amazed that we actually have equipment and applications and software that is even ahead of what they are using in some jurisdictions. So what it tells me is that the future of our country is bright. And one of the things that JPS is actually trying to do, Ricardo, right, is to try and keep us not only ahead of the game within the region, but in the international space, right, to keep us right up there until one day we'll become like Usain Bolt and run 9.58 seconds and run away, leave all the international competition in the world. You have to believe it in order to achieve it. And I believe it. I live that dream every day as the grid operator. And I know that all the staff here at our JPS are dedicated towards achieving that.
So I like how you coined it, Lincoln, and but just looking at the future grid itself, and you spoke about some of what we consider the design criteria for energy on the grid. And just to put the context out there for our viewers and our listeners, when we're speaking about energy, we're talking about the generation, transmission, distribution, the full delivery of energy from source to load, right? And all the interactions in between. So in our discussion today, we will not leave any component out because JPS is basically integrated right across the full spectrum of energy delivery, right? So we want to look at generation, we want to look at transmission, distribution, and whatnot. When we speak about resilience, however, as it relates to climate change, it poses a challenge to generation. In Jamaica in particular and a lot of other countries, our generators are primarily coastal.
Correct.
And that is exposed to the harsh effects of climate change by itself. The transmission grids, the power lines, which are sacrificed during these high wind events, are something that, you know, how do we build stronger? Is it that the future grid shouldn't have any wires? Is it that we should break the grid apart? We're talking about the future of energy here. How do we solve for resilience and, as you said, maintain the prices to where they are? Or is it that we're on a natural path of graduating from a centralized power system into maybe resiliency will come in a decentralized power system where you have smaller pockets of generators or something that the grid looks totally different than it is right now.
Okay.
But resilience is definitely one of the factors that is driving the grid of the future.
So I am looking here a while ago, and I just saw the hands of one of my bright students when you mentioned resilience. Just the hand just went up, right? So there seems to be a question already coming from the group, right? Go ahead and ask a question.
So, hi, Lincoln and Ricky.
Hi.
Good to be here. Good to hear from you guys. The question I do have, like how you mentioned, Ricky, about costing. One major component of delivering energy is really about people being able to afford energy and affordable energy. We're heavily fossil fuel driven, and we're going into alternative energy. Is the future looking like alternative energy will bring down costs for for our customers? That's my main question.
Well, that is a very good question, and right now we are in the process of diversifying our energy mix. We're not only using heavy fuels, as what you know. For many Jamaicans, you will know about the famous B6s and Old Harbour plants. But one of the interesting things that JPS has started to do since 2016 is to diversify its fuel mix by introducing natural gas into the mix, by converting its power plant at Bogue to run on natural gas. And then now, and I know that everybody I can hear all these Facebook and YouTube persons saying, yeah, what are they talking about? What happened to my light bill? What happened to the load shedding and everything? There's a brand new plant right now that we are trying to put online at the Old Harbour station, which will put in another 190 megawatt, or increasing our overall base load capacity by somewhere in excess of 30%, which runs on liquefied natural gas. Now, what does that mean to the average Joe, right? It means that you have flexibility of choice, right? In the past, it would have been HFO, whatever the oil market says. For those of you who drive cars, who take bus, you see that when oil prices move, everything moves. But when you go to liquefied natural gas and have a fuel option, right, you have a separate supplier who you can buy fuel sources from that will control what the ultimate price of generation is to the average consumers. Then not to mention wind and solar, renewable resources. So Jamaica is a land of wood and water, not water as in W-A-T-A that we drink, but also W-A-T-E-R, right? And one of the things that JPS has also been embarking on with other private entities in Jamaica is to introduce additional renewable resources. Now, these renewable sources, they come at, and as the technology improves in developing these technologies, it causes the cost of generation to be significantly reduced. So, if I'm not interested in using oil to run my generators anymore, I can go to renewable sources. And that now will tend to have the prices of electricity coming down. And then there is a project, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here, Ricky, but we're also looking to bring online JPS's first, and in the Caribbean, the world's largest hybrid energy storage system online within the next 2 weeks. Storage system, what you're talking about, batteries, and I'm not talking about Duracell or Everready, if those things still actually exist, right? So you don't even know what Everready is, right? A battery system enables us now to save up that energy from the wind and sun, because sun doesn't shine every day, right? And the wind doesn't blow every time. Batteries now enable us to make use or store that energy when the wind is blowing, typically at nights, in the early mornings when we don't need it. And we're able to redistribute it throughout the day. And instead of running fossil fuel units, right, to give you electricity, then we can use that stored energy, which was cheaper in the morning, and distribute it to our customers later at nights. All of this right now, and these are projects that I'm actually doing. I'm not reading a book. This is not a class I'm teaching. These are actual things that JPS is embarking on right now for the future of Jamaica that will drive down the prices of energy.
There are some other considerations too, as it relates to driving the price of energy down. It is expected, however, that while you transition, the prices will remain pretty much constant, because you're adding and subtracting almost at the same cost, right? But once you pass the tipping point, and the tipping point now will be driven primarily by the reduction in prices of energy storage and the continued reduction in prices of renewable energy sources. I do agree with you that the future of the grid will be green, primarily green, and composed of energy storage. That by itself will create a lot of opportunities and challenge for the grid operator. And I'm going to invite Lincoln to speak a little bit about some of those challenges. But in terms of projections and where the price is going to go, it depends on the composition of the grid. So I think the underlying assumption here is that we will have a grid. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking at where energy is so easily accessible and installed at commercial and residential premises, eventually what I see is a monumental growth in that sector, which reduces the reliance on the network itself. Because I've always believed that when it becomes so easy, it reduces the reliance on the power grid itself. It's almost like every man can do it for themselves type of thing. I don't need you. And remember, the grid evolved from standalone persons who were doing it by themselves, who could afford it. And because there was a need for it to be a social good, so that everybody could benefit, because no economy can grow without energy, right? So there was a component of it that became a social good, and grids were built. Now, if it becomes too easy, or where everybody can do it for themselves, easier than relying on the grid, then the relevance of the grid and all of what we're contemplating now, which would be going into a rate design or what, creates the rates that we pay, may be reduced. And what I would love us to do here is, when we're looking on the future of energy, just like when I asked you guys what the future of energy looks like, and you see all of these bright ideas going off in your mind, it's almost like you cannot really put your hand on it yet. The future where I see, Lincoln, is that I do believe that energy being so abundant from these renewable sources that we have will become too cheap to meter. And by too cheap to meter, it means that there's no need for you to have any form of energy accounting anymore. You have to find another way of doing business.
So that's an interesting point, and I see one next hand here. One of the things I said to Ricardo before I came here is that let's limit the scope of the conversation to at least probably a 5-10 year window. Not about flying cars, but just based on the interesting points you're saying, Ricky, we cannot be narrowed into the next 5 years. 10 years ago, when the first wind plant was coming onto the Jamaica grid, let me be honest with you here, right? I was not a fan of renewables. I was like, nah, this thing will not work out and everything. The prices of a wind plant are almost 50% lower than they were 10 years ago, right? Change is something that is inevitable, right? And if you don't embrace it, change is almost like an ocean wave. If you think that you can stand up to a big old wave coming, right, it will roll right over you. So one of the things that I have learned, even over my years, is to embrace change. And some of these same points that Ricky's talking about, wireless systems, right? The concept of no grid, the concept of probably not power so cheap that you're not paying for it. It is something that it is real actually in the here and now. Let me hear what one of you think about it. I saw a question coming here. What do you think about it? Okay, at the back here.
I've been following the conversation so far, and you made a point that kind of stuck with me. The point of the decreased cost and the future of storage as a part of energy as a whole. And my question is now, to what degree do you think personal storage might play a role in the future of energy? I mean, we have examples like Tesla Powerwalls internationally, and just storage as a concept. I mean, you said that we're doing our hybrid storage at a large scale. But what about when you bring it down to a consumer level and the decreasing price as technology innovates?
So I do believe that all of what you just said is going to happen in parallel. So the grid will have to respond. The only way that you can have increased penetration, and quite a few governments have set these green mandates. And some of these green mandates include 100% energy and renewable, right, in a country. And some of them, for example, Barbados, have extended not just to energy supply from the grid, but even electrification of transportation. So they want by 2040 that in the country of Barbados, all energy in the country would be green and renewable. Now, that is transformational for a utility to consider that space. In order to do that, storage has to be a part of the mix. Because with variable renewable energy, the only way you can have stability, even if it's your own standalone system, is to have storage, just to handle the periods of intermittency. So whether it's on a grid scale or it's on a domestic or commercial scale, storage will be a feature of the future grid. Now, as costs come down, we expect that the storage and the price and how you operate it will come down. The good thing is that just like the Tesla wall, business models will evolve. And utilities will have to transform into these business models. So for example, what Tesla had with their business model for the power wall was that you can power your house for 30 days with just this battery pack. It's very small and neat, right? And their business model was, when your charge is finished, we will either come and change it with a new power wall, so you have 30 more days, or you can go to a store like Walmart or somewhere like that and just exchange it, go back home, and you have power for another 30 days. Now that is transformational if you think about it. There's no reliance on the grid. So if you're thinking about all of these global phenomena that we're talking about now, and resilience, resilience has to do with how well do I recover, how well do I withstand, right? If you think about it, if you have all of these threats from climate change, if you have a power wall that is super resilient, because you almost have instantaneous power on board and it's portable. So you move around with it wherever you want to, right? So even if your roof blows off, with the power wall, you still have power, right? With the solar PV, if your roof blows off, you basically have lost a whole lot of power, right? But you're right, I think decentralization is going to really be part of the future. And as it becomes more compelling, the business case in Jamaica is super compelling right now. And the utility has to transform to meet that. Customers are putting a whole lot of different demands on us and different demands on the grid. So some of the demands that we are facing now, as business models evolve, we're going to have new demands that we haven't met as yet. Some of them that we're forecasting now include electric vehicle charging. And JPS is actually building out charging stations now. I think we're building out 10 by March next year. And these charging stations basically are there to reduce the anxiety that persons would have with buying an EV now. And hopefully it will spur the market and dealers and everybody will realize that it's easy to do, right? Business models will evolve from it as we talk about things like vehicle to grid and all of these other services that will come with just these new technologies.
Another interesting way you can put a spin on that question, Ricky, as being as a grid operator. So we are JPS, not everybody will be privileged to work in JPS, right? But how can you, from your home, become a member of JPS or the Jamaican National Grid, right? So Ricky mentioned about resiliency, right? Or let us say redundancy, backup systems. If I can't power you from the grid, what if you can power your street and yourself and others from your home, right? So there is something interesting now that we can look at a business model here. All right, so Jamaica doesn't have the Walmart and the Tesla and to go on Black Fridays like no, to go and buy a couple of those power packs, right? But what if now you have a couple batteries on your street, right, on Ivan Street? I know your name is not Ivan, but I can call you Ivan for today, right? So you live on Ivan Street and you have a couple batteries there and your neighbors have some batteries. What if you want to say then, all right, I am going to store some power from the grid in my batteries. And if something should happen that should allow the grid to become disconnected from all the customers on Ivan Street and in Ivan Town, can you now become suppliers of electricity to those persons on Ivan Street and Ivan Town? I see the face and smile up because you're seeing all of this as a business opportunity. You know, things can grow. And right here what happens now is that there's a partnership now between the the big utility of JPS and the customer, whereby you can become a supplier of your street, right? You can take energy from the big grid, and you can help the big grid to supply some of even its local customers, right? When the big grid, for whatever reason, when some guy tends to hit down a pole in a motor vehicle accident, or sometimes the people stealing electricity from the grid and then throwing up the wires, and they don't know which wire to throw up and catch the wrong wire and eventually kill themselves. And it causes the grid, a disconnection in the grid. This now empowers our customers now to become partners. And then what will happen here is that with the price of energy storage getting so low, right, you now can do what JPS is doing at the micro level, or something that you probably hear people call microgrids. So that's something interesting that you would want to be a part of. And it becomes an opportunity now where the customers and the JPS, instead of this one movement, the grid I manage right now is simply this. You take power from the generators, it goes to the transmission, it goes down to you, and it stops. One-way street. But in the new grid, which you will champion, we will have bidirectional flow where power can leave your homes and supply your friends and supply the big grid, and in that we can all be intertwined. Right?
Good afternoon, Lincoln, Ricky. I know earlier you guys had touched on it briefly, electric vehicles. As you were saying earlier, a lot of what we pay is the fuel charge in terms of the fuel required to generate energy. So how do you see electric vehicles kind of transforming our grid? I know you had mentioned EV to the grid itself. We hadn't really touched on that, or how electric vehicles would completely transform how our grid functions now.
So before it transforms the grid, I think we kind of have to look at it in terms of how it transforms our society and how it transforms Jamaica, right? So Jamaica has signed on to the Paris Agreement, and this audacious goal requires us to basically go green to some extent, right? To clean up 3.5 million metric tons of carbon dioxide out of the environment by 2030, right? Now, when we have done our simulations, Lincoln and I do quite a bit of studies, we realize that just the conversion of our generation only would cause us to miss that target. So the only way that we're going to get to that last mile is to dip into the transportation sector, right? So it is necessary for us to just meet our promise to the world of reducing the carbon dioxide in the environment by itself. That's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge for the grid operator itself. We're excited about the customer interactions that will come from it and the new business models. But electric vehicles are ubiquitous. You do not know where they're going to connect to the grid, when they're going to connect to the grid. And unless we basically are ahead of the game in terms of ensuring that we have adequate capacity wherever it is for the charging, one of the things that we know from electric vehicles, and many articles are written on this, most of the charging is done at home or at work. And you find that charging stations are primarily used for people who are traveling maybe longer distances or maybe have an emergency to some extent. So that human behavior and that pattern will remain. It's a big opportunity for any business. And if you think about it, if I am a fleet operator, let's say that I am JUTC or I am the police force, which operates very large fleets. If you have all of these vehicles that are parked at your facility in the night, with maybe, let's say half of them have charge to spare, then that entire facility can run just from the EV output and be off the grid just for that period. So there's a business sense in it. Also, as power wheeling becomes more available to the public through regulation, and regulation is something that we have to speak about because there's no way that we can transform or the future of energy is possible without the regulator being on board, right? So when you think about it, all of that is basically going to rapidly change the whole landscape of how we move around, we transport. Big opportunities are there because just the storage alone in Norway, at any point in time in Norway, the entire country's spinning reserve is available in electric vehicles. So what that means is at any point in time, if, with demand response programs, the utility or the grid can access power from these electric vehicles and avoid running more expensive generators. So if you think about it, the whole purpose and repurposing of the grid is going to change. In terms of pricing, that is where it becomes complicated. And that's where people who have MBAs and PhDs in finance and economics and statistics, they can basically work out, models to simulate what the prices should be. But I do not want us to limit ourselves in terms of all of those possibilities. We know that the grid has capacity now to absorb an upswell of much more, of even maybe 15% of the entire fleet of motor vehicles on Jamaica's roads now, without us having to be forced to move the grid further than it is now. Once you get beyond a certain point, then we're talking about the distribution network is going to be first hit. So you're talking about upgrades to your distribution network. If we're doing two-way power, we're talking about doing more fuse coordination, changing our protection systems. We're going to have a monitoring system in your control center, Linkoy, that basically understands in real time where these cars are, which chargers they are connected to, and communicating to all of these cars in real time so that persons can make decisions about managing the grid, because it becomes a capacity issue after a point in time.
I have an additional thing to say on that as well, where EVs are concerned. So one of the things when you look into electric vehicles, right, typically comparing your electric vehicles to your internal combustion vehicles. So you put gas into your car, right, and out of all of that power that you can get from that gas into your car or your bus, only 30% of that fuel that you put in can be converted into some form of useful work, right? Which means there is another, right, 70% that will be wasted, right? What if, for your electric vehicles, instead of us now saying, okay, all right, cool, put these new form of fuels, because everybody is talking about some biofuels, putting compressed LNG, compressed natural gas into cars and buses. What if you have technology, right, that can convert that fuel into electricity at a much better efficiency? So, for example, some of these combined cycle plant units that we're talking about now that we're trying to put on our grid, they have efficiencies between 60 to 65%, right? So instead of putting that fuel directly into your car or your bus, right, which we do now every day, we put that into these generators. It makes electricity almost an additional 30% more efficiency. And then now you take that electricity on the grid now and run your electric vehicles. In that now you would have used the same fuel that goes into your car, right, that does 30% less work, and doing more work on the grid by putting that fuel into generators now on the grid, putting electricity for all in additional to renewables. Then now, at different gas stations now, you will have a Ricardo charging station, where basically at different distances, 100 kilometers, depending on the charging rate, people now can move from point to point, whether it is DHL or FedEx moving, or you just traveling out to the country, or you're going to ATR to negotiate, say, if I make about 3 stops on the weekend, right? In this now, the conversion, instead of you going to the gas station to buy 87 and 90 and full up $6 grand, if you're thinking about the overall business model, you would have probably just used $3,000, right, in your light bill by putting fuel somewhere else, getting it as electricity, 30% more efficiency than your car, and in that now, you're going to grill for cheaper, right? You have more money to spare, right? And in that now, EVs has helped now to reduce also the national oil bill for the country,
Yeah.
right? And that is a combination of the existing grid concept and the new EVs chart, right? To basically help bring down prices for the average Jamaican, even those who will not have EVs.
So Lincoln, we did a study about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Don't know if you remember Exergy Energy. They came here and
That's Exxon?
No, Exergy
Oh,
Energy
sorry.
out of Canada.
Not good on the spelling, sorry. Yeah.
So they did a study, a pilot, where we installed loggers in our own fleet.
Mhm.
We installed loggers in the Avis rental fleet as well.
Mhm.
And basically did a 4-month study of just doing normal business and for the tourists who would have rented the vehicle and how they move. And we took that data into consideration for just the building out of the charging stations and also to select the type of vehicles that would best suit our purposes in Jamaica. Understanding the range of these vehicles as well and the size of the country, it's easy to understand that, on a full charge, you can get, and, JPS has its own vehicle that we use, our own Nissan Leaf, that we use for movement around the country, right? So it's safe to say that someone can get from Port Antonio to Negril on a single charge in a Nissan Leaf, right? And perhaps wouldn't need to charge again until they get to Montego Bay before they head back to Kingston, right? So when you look on the concept of electric vehicles and the relevance to Jamaica, I agree with you. Based on the study that was done, you can actually reduce for a single person who would be transitioning from a gas vehicle that's paying maybe about 30,000 a month now in petrol. Let's say they fill up 4 times, and from that 4 times filling up, they probably are doing maybe close to 500 kilometers per month, right? You could basically slash that in more than half by an EV. Also and that is ignoring the O&M costs. That's just on fuel. Because we know that these cars have no parts. Pretty much it's just an electric motor. So it basically reduces the overall. It's highly compelling for persons to think about EV, especially when you add those future vehicle-to-grid benefits that the consumer can participate in. And I see we have a question here.
So, Ricky, you had mentioned earlier about us, I'm not sure if it was Ricky or Lincoln, but you had mentioned about us leapfrogging everybody else on the international stage in terms of energy, right? Yeah, and also mentioned a lot of challenges that we have out here, like reliability and so on. So, as is often the case, we have a lot of technical solutions that often exist for those challenges, but the hard part is more the financial aspect of it. So, as it exists now, other countries are much further ahead of us in terms of, I guess you could say, the energy maturity, right? So they might be fully renewable or to a higher degree than we have out here. So my question is, are we positioning ourselves, and when I say we, I mean the country, positioning ourselves to be able to implement some of these solutions? Because there are many and they're very exciting, but you see other countries, ahead of us. What is it that you think Jamaica needs for us to start accelerating?
So you raise a good point, and I think we're heading in the right direction as a country. You would have heard the minister speak about an EV policy. If we're just picking an EV, right? And the government is basically reviewing its own EV policy, which we believe that when rolled out would basically transform and take us much further than at the pace that we're going now, right? Jamaica is leading the Caribbean for sure in some of the other areas. So for example, our renewable energy penetration target that has been set by the ministry and the amount of projects that we have in the pipeline and those that are already on the ground would put us far ahead of quite a few countries. Lincoln spoke about the hybrid energy storage system. There's no other utility anywhere in the world that is doing a hybrid energy storage solution,
Of that
right?
scale.
Of that scale. So Jamaica is leading in some areas, but I do believe that as the government and the regulators chew on it a bit more, then they're going to understand and they're going to bring these policies out much faster. We understand that disruption is hard, and control disruption is even harder, because part of it is that you are trying to protect what you're going to lose before you disrupt. And if you think about it, there's a whole lot of revenue that comes from fuel taxes. That is a very easy tax for the government to collect, right? If you think about it, motor vehicle imports, there's a whole lot of revenue that the government gets from motor vehicle imports. If you're trying to grow EV and incentivize the market, you're going to have to relax some of those constraints in order for certain things to grow. So policy absorption in Jamaica takes time, because it's not like we're a rich country, and it will come with challenges. And I'm sure, the minister in her deliberations, she's trying to pick and choose to ensure that we don't disrupt the whole Jamaica too much, because we do have a tax compliance issue. So if we are to reduce the easy taxes that are easy to collect, we have to replace it with something else to pay the nurses, the doctors, the police, and everything, and keep the country going. So I know it's not an easy decision, Lincoln,
It's not that easy.
for the minister or anybody, and maybe I'm not suggesting that this is the only reason why, but we do believe that policy and leadership will move us much further than we are going right now.
So here is that's a very good point, Ricky. So see the hand, right? So here's a good step now. So you're basically saying, how can we drive down the price of this thing to get some money to do other things? Here's a 3-step process. First part of it now is our oil bill. Cannot sustain it. In years gone by, we have spent up to $1 billion every year on fuel, right? So the first thing, according to the energy policy, is to promote fuel diversification. What are we doing as a country, right? We are basically improving that fuel mix. No longer will we be reliant on one source of fuel. So the first step now is to introduce fuel diversification, whether it be natural gas, automotive diesel oil, biofuels, burning all and everything at Riverton City or other landfills, right? Heavy fuels. To have many more sources that you can choose from to control the fuel prices, which is very volatile, right? The second part of it is that integrate renewables into the grid. One thing is that you don't want to be dependent on any one source, especially all the fuel things I'm talking about a while ago. We don't have no natural gas here. We don't have no fuel. But what we have breeze, we have sun, we have wind, right? What if now we find a way to leverage the efficiencies of these new technologies now? So to lessen the dependency on somebody importing these fuel sources in, we basically now become some form of supplier to generate our own electricity that is reliable and sustainable. So hence now the money bill is starting to come down. That $1 billion now is starting to look like $7 billion, which means we have just started to free up $300 million. We don't talk J here, it's us we're talking about, right? Then the other part of it now to help us to manage is energy efficiency, promotion of energy efficiency. EVs could be one of them, right? LED lights. One of the things you even see JP is doing is this smart LED lights. When you're flying over the country now, for those of you who fly, right, or who go up to look out, right, is white light is seen and no longer yellow, right? That yellow, that has now changed to white. Last year, based on my records, it has reduced more almost our total capacity needs for the peak, almost 5%, right? So therefore now, I am using less energy. So instead of us as a country spending money on imported energy needs, right? Because for those of you who took physics seriously, energy can either be created or destroyed. So even though it's electricity we want, right? That's win some laughing because she never take physics seriously, whatever the one thing she learned at the class was that, right? Instead of bringing the energy in that source from somewhere else, you get it at a cheaper level What you have done now is freed up disposable income for the country. Now we can start now to deeper dive into other things that the country needs to revolutionize the transportation sector, the whole energy market, by just changing the energy mix, by using policy, as Ricky saying, and the relevant studies. You would have just freed up money. Once the energy prices are down, it means consumers now spend less on their light bill, right? Instead of one entity getting that money every month, you now have money to go and do other things. You can set up your own business. So in that, the step is 1, fuel diversification, 2, renewable integration, and using...
Everyone else here. I love everything that is being said about the future of energy, about the EVs, the diversification of fuel, about the storage, and I'm very excited about the future of energy. What I would want to know, most definitely, it sounds good. What I would want to know is, while we introduce these new initiatives and things for the future to create, cheaper, greener energy, before we get there, what are we doing currently to reduce, like, say, power outages? That if there's anything being done to reduce that while we get ahead.
So you ask a very pertinent question, and I'm sure quite a lot of the viewers now have that very same question. And for us in engineering and in JPS, this speaks to reliability, right? Reliability has to do with how well you keep the lights on, pretty much, to the average person, right? So if you think about the investment in the hybrid energy system, that really is one investment that JPS has made in a technology that is geared to keep the lights on, right? Now, as more renewables are introduced into the grid, we see where more technologies like this might need to come in play. However, it's not the only way to skin the cat. There are what we would call demand response programs that would basically allow consumers who can self-generate to participate in grid management. And that would be a business model that I'm sure would be a part of our certain future. Outside of that, JPS has basically invested in other grid technologies, distribution automation, that will allow for automatic transfer of feeders that would go out due to outages, right? So you may have a situation, Lincoln spoke about it, where a car might hit a pole and force a particular part of the network to go out, right? The technology that we have now would automatically isolate that area and transfer the power to being fed from another source. Now, as we elaborate our minds and think about the future of the grid, where persons are actively participating in a grid like that now, where potentially everybody is a candidate to supply the grid, you realize how that footprint of outage is going to become even smaller. So I do believe that there's an opportunity for JPS as we look into this future to exercise that type of muscle to ensure that the reliable operation of the grid remains sound. But JPS has certainly introduced business analytics to crunch the numbers better. So we're actually applying the smart meter technologies, which tells us exactly where on the network is actually faced with an outage in real time, so the customer doesn't have to call us anymore. Automatic rerouting of power. When you have energy participation, when markets are open, so that you have aggregators, people can subscribe to a market for a particular rate and then participate in the grid management. All of these things are going to ensure that the grid is much more reliable. But I know we have just a few minutes left, but I want to speak about what the future really, really looks like in a tangible way, right? So the best way to do that is to bring it home. So what will your home look like in 2030? Your home will be a connected device on a network. Pretty much that is what it will be. Your home would be, I say, having all the power that you need being supplied by yourself. And participation in a network, if a network actually exists. Right? So we see a prevalence of internet and communication technologies keeping you connected, either to a market or to a system. We see electric vehicles being standard. We see the energy footprint, I see your question, we see the energy footprint in all residential and commercial places shrinking. I remember there's a printer downtown that 20 years ago they had these big machines to do their printing. Now, printing is done now by smaller, more efficient Xerox machines. So that customer who had a bank of 3 transformer linker only now needs one single 25 kVA transformer. So just the energy footprint in the commercial space, the industrial space, and the residential space naturally is shrinking. And technology is going to push you out of the way. So if you don't adapt and change, just the wave of technology and the naturalness of it and how easy it is to do will push you aside. So you either choose to be the disruptor or choose to be disrupted. But it's inescapable. I will have a question down there at the end.
Thank you. Ricky, Linkoy, colleagues, viewers, good afternoon. I found the discussion about the decentralization of the grid to be rather interesting, and I think I largely agree with it in terms of it being a logical and even a close thing that's going to happen, or something that's going to happen soon, I should say. Now, for countries like Costa Rica, for example, that move between 98 and 99% renewable focus, I imagine it would be easier for them where decentralization is concerned, because they would have had the experience of using that amount of renewables and incorporating it into their grid to do that transitioning. But for a country like Jamaica, where we're still working to diversify where that's concerned, what things do you think are important for us to look at when we're trying to incorporate more renewables, and then the possibility of a more decentralized grid or smaller grids? How do you get that with the focus on including more renewables?
I would like to make our first call inquiry.
All right, go ahead.
And I know my engineering team is actually watching too, right? So it really starts with planning. And you hit the nail right on the head. We have a golden opportunity now, Lincoln, with the integrated resource plan that is being developed by the ministry to incorporate, deliberately so, distributed generation. Once distributed generation is incorporated in our plans, then it becomes easily integrated into the rest of the system, right? So you're able to size it, scale it, adjust the topology of your network to ensure that the disruption created by that planned decentralization doesn't disturb the entire grid operations. And also, so much so that you can put in the management tools and management systems to operate both simultaneously. So that takes you into what you were speaking about, Lincoln, in terms of the microgrids, which will have the ability to hop off the main grid and operate a smaller section of your grid and hop on when they choose to.
Right.
But you can only achieve that through careful planning, because the customers who are in the microgrid, they are not concerned about who I am getting power from at a particular time. They are concerned about the price I'm paying and the reliability of my supply. Right? For the utility, we look on other factors, right? But primarily, when the grid is split up, it must have the same level of service as it has when it's whole. So the best way to achieve that is through careful studies, analysis, and plans.
Okay, and let me sum up, and probably my final point here, the two questions, or two last questions that were asked. It's on the minds of every Jamaican, talking about reliability here, right? So at the large scale level, in terms of generation, most of JPS's and Jamaica's generation fleet averaging about 30 to 40 years old, right? So one of the things that we're looking to do is to change out those age generation assets to newer assets. And probably over the next 5 years, right, most of those units that you had on the grid that would have resulted in load shedding, right, would be no more from a generating perspective, or significantly less. On the distribution side, the reliability management, Ricky spoke about it, it's called grid modernization. Being able to make your outage areas more smaller than wide as they are today by using smart intelligent devices that are speaking to each other to reduce the overall customer impact. And that is something that in JPS's 5-year plan, which is currently being developed, is to try, and at least in baby steps, because it takes cash to care, right? So one of the things is that sometimes we need to spend a little bit more money to enable the customers first to, yes, you might see a slight increase on your bill, but knowing that the end game is totally reduced costs and reliability improvement. So the JPS 5-year plan, which JPS is planning to invest almost $500 million in the next 5 years, is to promote grid modernization to improve the grid reliability by more than 20%. And then now, to sustain for our renewable integration, right, there are things that we are doing along the line of not only the studies, but the hybrid energy storage system, and as well as getting generators that are able to match the quick up and down movement by some of these new renewable plants. So we're using energy storage devices, we're using more efficient and faster generating technologies that can help us now to enhance and leverage the full benefit from these renewable plants, from wind and solar. In fact, the new plant at Old Harbor is less than another $400 million. So you're talking about almost $1 billion being spent, right, over a 5-6 year window to improve the reliability of the grid, right, to improve the affordability of electricity, and by promoting renewable integration and the introduction of what we call microgrids, it helps customers now who have different form of energy solutions to become partners within your own homes and commercial enterprises by placing smaller generators either through JPS or any private entity and directly in your towns and cities, so that if there's a disconnection between the big and the large grid, power can move in both directions. And it will take you, the young, brilliant minds in this room, coupled with the old mind like Ricky, right, and the in-between mind like myself, to try and get us there. It's a process. It will take time. There will be teething pains, but eventually we will, and we are going to get there. Ricky?
Yeah, and I think I just remembered the New York Times reported that the country with the most powerful clean technology industry in the 21st century will have the most energy security, national security, economic security, healthy environment, innovative companies, and global respect. So if you think about what the future utility or future grid is going to bring to just any economy itself, all of these things basically is a promise of growth. And the business transactions, the imagination, this is where the innovation, new products, new services, all of the things that these younger minds are interested in now. It's a very exciting time to be an engineer, whether you're an old school engineer or somebody just coming out of college who is looking at the grid or looking at energy, the energy market itself, to basically dream. And I mean, we started out looking at, you said the Jetsons, I had said Kit. But if you think about that transformation effect of a dream into a reality, there's no obstacle in the energy sector that prevents this from being a reality. And the behind the meter space is ripe for picking. And this is where I believe a lot of new ideas and innovation is going to come as equipment starting to communicate directly with the grid behind the meter. As customers who have various processes behind the meter interact with the grid through the smart meter. So the future is bright. We just don't know what it's going to be. But it's going to be much more exciting than it is right now. And Linka, it was a pleasure being here with you. I always enjoy, we talk about these things around the lunchroom all the time. But to be in a forum like this, sharing with all our viewers,
The
right?
bright future.
And the bright people in the room, right? It's a pleasure being here with you, speaking to
Yes,
this
sir.
august body. And thank you very much.
And thank you, everybody. And,
And
thank
thank
you,
you.
YouTube and Facebook, and our JPS customers for tuning in today. All right. Until next time, this is Ricardo and Linkoy saying good evening.
Thank you.